Luka Doncic is getting into the best shape of his life, and if Zion Williamson follows the same path, the Pelicans can be vindicated for every move they made this offseason. It's a Tuesday episode of Locked On Pelicans. Let's go.
You are Locked On Pelicans, your daily New Orleans Pelicans podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Welcome to another edition of Locked On Pelicans, the daily podcast covering your favorite team, the New Orleans Pelicans and NBA, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day, available wherever you get your podcasts and available on YouTube. I'm your host, Pelicans Insider, credential member of the media, Jake Madison, at NOLA Jake on Twitter, here with y'all on this Tuesday, and we got a lot to cover in today's show. I'm going to tell you why Zion needs to be a little bit like Luka Doncic, but why there's a reason he might not do it. What's preventing him here? But also, if he does get in shape, the Pelicans get vindicated for everything this offseason. Everything, I mean that. Then we're going to look at our next edition, or the next face on Pelicans Mount Rushmore, and that is Baron Davis, and I'll tell you why I chose him, despite not having as long of a tenure in the city as a number of other players. And then in the third, I want to look at Jose Alvarado's role next year, because I think it's going to be very specific for the Pelicans next season. So we got a lot to cover in today's episode of Locked On Pelicans. And of course, thank you for making Locked On Pelicans your first listen today and every day. We're here Monday through Friday, the #1 Pelicans podcast, covering everything you want to know about this Pelicans team. So please subscribe wherever you get your podcast and join over 11,000 Pelicans fans on YouTube as well and become an everydayer. That means you listen to Locked On Pelicans Monday through Friday. And don't forget, you can also watch us on the Gulf Coast Sports and Entertainment Network. Same place you watch your Pelicans play. We're on there every single weekday at 10:30 a.m. By the way, if you're an everydayer, let me know in the comments down below. I see y'all. So I, like everybody, saw the Luka Doncic pictures that came out the other day of, okay, Luka's in ridiculously good shape. Luka Doncic is now saying he jumps higher even. You know, every kind of criticism of him has been kind of that, you know, not in game shape, doesn't show up in shape. Does he take care of his body too much or not enough? Sorry, not too much at all. And so on and so forth, right? And then there's the criticism of defense, but let's focus on like the body stuff. And it's like, yeah, that's been the criticism. That kind of applies to Zion Williamson too, doesn't it? You know, he doesn't necessarily approach the offseason in the way that you would like, just like Luka Doncic hasn't. He shows up not quite in game shape, then it takes him a while to play himself into it. And by then maybe an injury happens because maybe he's working himself too hard, or who knows why, right? You know, I don't want to get into, you know, the guessing game that comes with all of that. But there's similarities there. And so if Zion Williamson kind of takes a page out of the Luka Doncic playbook here, the Pelicans can be vindicated. There's a big asterisk on this, and I'll explain that in a minute. But the Pelicans can be vindicated for everything they did this offseason, I think. You know, people are very much questioning them. Basically, every sort of grading is giving them an F for their offseason moves. Now, I did a Mythbusters episode on why trading for Jordan Poole and the extra year on his contract was a smart thing to do, and something that people are very much missing with that. If you haven't watched that show, the Everydayers have, go make sure you watch that one, because there's a specific reason they traded for Jordan Poole, who had an extra year on his deal. But Jordan Poole can be more of a downhill attacking threat. And when you pair that with a Jeremiah Fears 2 and Zion Williamson, along with Derek Queen as well, when he's healthy, this is a team that should be drawing an absolute ton of fouls. Zion gets you into the bonus single-handedly, but you need other players to take advantage of that, and the Pelicans haven't. CJ McCollum was not drawing fouls and getting in line. Neither was Brandon Ingram, right? So if you now have your complementary players that play downhill, attacking the rim, getting fouled, going to the line, all of a sudden you're living at the free throw line. That's the most efficient shot in the league. Derek Queen draws free throws at a pretty high rate and can get to the line. Jeremiah Fears lived at the line in college. I did a whole show about that. That's my favorite stat about him, right? The rim pressure rate, essentially. Jordan Poole plays more downhill than CJ McCollum does. That's a massive thing here. It's only going to work if Zion's healthy, where you can live at the free throw line. Look, at that point, I cared less about half-court offense, transition offense. Cool, you just get fouled and you go to the line. Let's make that. It's boring. I won't say it's the most fun thing to watch, but it can be effective, and you'll win basketball games doing that. It also has the knock-on effect of fouling out opponent players, thus making your life even easier. One of those things that can snowball, right? The snake that eats its like own tail and everything. And, you know, they'll also be vindicated by building around Zion. They need to, him to come in shape. If he doesn't, then you're going to have Joe Dumars come, look like a fool essentially we've put the leadership on him. It's his team now. We're building around Zion, all that stuff. If he comes out and it doesn't work, it's like, why did you think it would be different? They need that to almost vindicate it because they've said they're building around Zion, that they're still in the Zion Williamson business. And that's, where they are right now. So they need Zion to kind of do this. Also, look, if Zion just looks like that in the offseason, it gets everyone hyped again. I think I have a pretty good feel of the fan base and everything, just doing the show, seeing the comments, talking to so many people and just being actively involved in things. Right now, I wouldn't say the fan base is as low as national media is on the team, but I don't think people have like tons and tons of excitement when it comes to this, even through the rushed hire of Joe Dumars, right? Zion showing up in shape, looking incredible, Luka looks like a different person. You don't want Zion to look like a different person. You still want him to be, have a ton of muscle because he's got to bang down low as a big man. But we just want him to be healthy, and being in shape more so than he's been is going to do that. We want to see this team get off to a good start because if they don't, that's going to be a big problem for New Orleans soon. And then they're going to be the laughing stock of the league because, well, they don't own their first round pick next year. So you kind of got to be good. So they're putting a lot on Zion Williamson's shoulders here, I think, with this. Here's the thing. We know why Luka Doncic did this. He got traded from Dallas. They just threw him under the bus so much on his way out. He doesn't play defense. Defense wins championships, according to Nico Harrison. He's out of shape. That's a problem for us. We don't like him having a beer or two after the game, which truthfully I don't care about. It motivated him to be the best version of himself. Sometimes you need that little bit of like spite, hurtfulness to be that spark, that motivational factor for you here. What's Zion's motivation? Right? That's where this gets tricky. It wasn't like Zion was traded. It's not like whatever anyone says about him in the media motivates him more because otherwise it would have changed things by now. This needs to be an internal motivation to just do the thing in a way that he's never done before. And look, he works out in the offseason, does 2 days, eats right and all of those things. But, there's been clips from social media in the past and things like that do make you still question it. And then when he shows up, that's the true test. He doesn't look quite right and it takes a while for him to get there. And by then the season is kind of shot. So what's his motivating factor going to be? Only he can answer that question. He and his people, I guess, can answer that question, right? I don't know. I don't know what the carrot on the stick is, what the motivational tool is here. Maybe it's Joe Dumars. Maybe it's different, whatever it might be. He needs to find that and use it, and everyone needs to kind of lean into that motivational side of things so that he's the best version of him so that this team can kind of be vindicated in a sense, I think, and make the weird bad vibes around the offseason completely change. And look, it'll make Joe Dumars look like a genius. It'll make everyone with the team look like a genius. And Zion goes back to being the hero. Everybody wins here, and the Pelicans will be good. That's fun, too. I like watching winning basketball. Let me know what you think. What do you think about the Luka Doncic thing in the first place? Because, whoa, that was something. In the comments down below on YouTube. So coming up next phase, I keep saying that, on Pelicans Mount Rushmore, Baron Davis. Is that a controversial choice? I'm curious what you think. I'll lay out the reasoning for it. That's coming up here next in today's episode of Locked On Pelicans. Today's episode of Locked On Pelicans brought to you by 5-Hour Energy Transfusion. It's time to fuel up and turn it up with 5-Hour Energy Transfusion. It brings the bold grape, ginger, and lime flavors of your favorite golf drink, minus the alcohol, into a quick and energizing shot. Look, I play a good bit of golf. It's hot in New Orleans. You got to get up early. I have like a 6 a.m., 6:20, 6:15 a.m. tee time. I don't have time to stop for coffee. I'm not going to wake up even earlier than I'm already waking up to go make coffee. I need something to get me energized to go play my best, which is admittedly not that good. 5-Hour Energy does it. Look, just grab one of those. You can bring another one with you, but you can just drink it in 2 seconds and I'm out the door and I've got what I need. Maybe that's why I birdied 15 at Audubon. Eagled at 15 at Audubon the other day. I want to be clear on that one. So golf is all about good times with good people and good flavors, of course. So the grape, ginger, lime flavor gives you the best parts of your clubhouse go-to without chasing down the beverage cart. So if you go to 5hourenergy.com today, that's the number 5hourenergy.com, you can use the promo code LOCKEDONGolf and receive 20% off your order. The offer is valid only until September 30th on one order, cannot be used with other promotions, and the code is not good on subscription orders. So whether you're meeting up with friends or trying to turn 18 holes into 36, get the energizing boost you need to power through. Order transfusion-flavored 5-Hour Energy shots today. And thank you for making Locked On Pelicans your first listen today and every day. We're here Monday through Friday, the number one Pelicans podcast covering everything you want to know about this Pelicans team. So please subscribe wherever you get your podcast and join over 11,000 Pelicans fans on YouTube as well and become an everydayer. That means you listen Monday through Friday to the Locked On Pelicans podcast. We are part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. For your second listen, it's Locked On Saints. How's training camp going? Who's going to be QB1? Locked On Saints host Ross Jackson is covering everything black and gold, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. He's also on the Gulf Coast Sports and Entertainment Network at 10 a.m. every single weekday. Then it's Locked On Pelicans at 10:30, Locked On LSU at 11, and then Locked On SEC at 11:30. We got a 2-hour Locked On block for you on the Gulf Coast Sports and Entertainment Network. So let's get into the Pelicans Mount Rushmore, which we're doing this week. I led with Chris Paul yesterday, which is funny because then his introductory press conference again with the Clippers was like yesterday evening, or maybe it was Tuesday. And, I said maybe it's tough to leave him off, but him having like a longer tenure with the Clippers does make me feel a certain way. It feels like they claim him more than New Orleans claims him, but that's not what this is about. If you're looking for those just kind of foundational important players, Chris Paul is number one by far, in my opinion, on the Pelicans Mount Rushmore. There's two other names we're going to talk about this week, but I want to go with a different one. And I'm not necessarily going in order here, but I want to put Baron Davis on the New Orleans basketball Mount Rushmore. Now, Baron Davis played a shorter period of time. We're not counting his first 3 years in the league when they were the Charlotte Hornets. We're looking at only the New Orleans tenure here, the New Orleans franchises. And so his first season was the first season of the New Orleans Hornets here in 02-03. And he played here 02-03, 03-04, then was traded in the 04-05 season. And those first 2 years were truly something special, in my opinion here. In the 02-03 season, 17 points per game, 6.4 assists. He took 5.7 threes per game in that time, which is crazy back in 02-03. 3.7 rebounds, just an electrifying player. 03-04 was even better. He was an all-star that year, made the All-NBA third team, 22.9 points per game. He led the league in steals with 2.4 per game. 7.5 assists, 4.3 rebounds. He shot 8.7 three-point attempts, which in 03-04 is like unheard of to me. That led the league. And he shot, well, not great on it, 32%. Then the next year, the team was bad. He had dealt with injuries, and he was traded. And we don't need to go into that too much. But look, Baron Davis doesn't have, the stats of some other players, let's say, or as long of a tenure here in New Orleans. It's going to be the shortest of anyone we put on here during this time. But when the Charlotte Hornets relocated to New Orleans, right, Baron Davis was essentially the face of the franchise. And coming in with like a guy who had already been an all-star that was an electrifying player and young, that was important to just establishing the team in the city. You have a bankable guy that everybody loves. And look, he led them to 2 straight playoff appearances in that 02-03 and 03-04 season. And so for a franchise that straight up doesn't have, that kind of run, right? That was important. Just even though you lose in the first round each year, to make the playoffs in the first 2 years is phenomenal, right? The Pelicans have only done that one other time, and it's that Chris Paul, David West team that did it in 07-08, 08-09. Those are the 2 times this franchise has made playoffs in back-to-back years. So to do that, is important. The first year they were 47-35. It's pretty good. Next year was 41-41. Then it was a disaster the year after that. And then they drafted Chris Paul. But Baron Davis just being the electrifying, like flashy, aggressive, fearless kind of player was just something that was energizing, I think, right? Having a dynamic score that could play downhill, explode to the rim is a lot of fun. And then being a playmaker of getting other guys involved, when it's a point guard being your lead guy, it can be really great when he's your best player because they're capable of just taking over games in another way, whether it's 30-plus point performances. I think he had something like 10 over 9 or 10 in that almost the all-star year for him here, right? And then being able to just drop dimes and do flashy things like that's really great, right? Now, injuries limited him here. You know, he dealt with a ton of injuries there. There was some front office friction. I can't really speak today. You know, that is not ideal. The injury bug it's like a curse ever, you know, but when you think of who you would put on the Mount Rushmore, right? Baron Davis is who you would call this franchise is the city's like first star, since we're not counting the Jazz era, right? You know, they were a relevant team those first 2 years when that often isn't the case. So without him, right, it's very possible that they would have been an irrelevant franchise initially relocating here. And what does that do? How does that change things for a team that, you know, had at one point, not anymore because they're not moving. We talked about that stuff yesterday, you know, kind of a tumultuous tenure here. So having that first star player, you know, like the first dude, that's Baron Davis. You know, that seems to be important to me if we're putting it on the Mount Rushmore. Look, there's a couple of reasons why you would leave him off. One, that short tenure, the injuries. He also hasn't said like glowing things about New Orleans after the fact. I think a couple of years ago, he gave an interview where he's like, I would take half the pay to live in Los Angeles and not New Orleans, right? That ain't going to do it, buddy, when it comes to the franchise, you know, the fan base and having people, you know, involved here, right? But he did do a good job of legitimizing basketball in New Orleans with the return here. And, you know, if you ignore the more recent comments he's made, at least until then, right, this was someone who I do think was still a fan favorite. People, you know, if you were old enough to kind of remember that time and watch it, you have very fond memories of him as a player, just being a pretty electrifying athlete. And so I think that despite the very short tenure that he's had here, and maybe not like the statistical highs of some of the other, you know, people that we could put on this list here, is still valid, right? And basically 2.5 years. It's only 135 games, 126 starts, 20 points per game, 2.1 steals, 7 assists, 4 rebounds, and not great shooting from 3. But, you know, this was a guy that was just so much fun to watch. Got to the free throw line a good amount as well while he was here. Legitimizing basketball in New Orleans, where it is still legitimate, is a really important thing. So he's going to have the shortest tenure of anyone we're going to put on here, but he's like the OG, right? He's like the first dude. And I think that definitely does matter, despite, you know, the shorter tenure and some of the negative things that he has said after the fact. Well, you want to hear the most incredible stat here? This one, I saw this and I was like, wait, excuse me? When he was an all-star in 03-04, how many minutes per game do you think he averaged? Like, this blows my mind to see, knowing today's era. 40.1 minutes per game. There's 48 minutes in a basketball game. A starter plays usually about 36 minutes. It's actually lower than that now, but for a long time, 36 minutes was like the average number for a starter. And that's why I use per 36 minute numbers pretty often, stats, to kind of equalize things for guys that have different roles if you're trying to project or, you know, rein something back in. But to play 40.1 minutes per game is like unheard of, in my opinion. That's kind of cool. Like, I enjoy that. That's a pretty cool thing to see, just an insane number like that here of like, wow, I was not expecting that to be the case at all for this team. So coming up next, so do you think Baron Davis should be on there? You know, if depending on who the other guys are, we got to tease it a little bit ahead. But I definitely think just being the first dude is an important thing to include when you're kind of looking at the history of the franchise. Do you agree? Do you disagree? Let me know in the comments down below. Coming up next, though, let's go back to the current team. Jose Alvarado. Fan favorite. Maybe he can make a case to being on Mount Rushmore. Let's look at his role next season, because I don't think it's going to be what you think. That's coming up here next in today's episode of Locked On Pelicans. And thank you for making Locked On Pelicans your first listen today and every day. We're here Monday through Friday, the #1 Pelicans podcast, covering everything you want to know about this Pelicans team. So please subscribe wherever you get your podcasts and join over 11,000 Pelicans fans on YouTube as well and become an everydayer. That means you listen Monday through Friday to the Locked On Pelicans podcast. And if you're an everydayer, let me know in the comments down below. You can also watch us on the Gulf Coast Sports and Entertainment Network every weekday at 10:30 a.m. for your second listen today. It's Locked On NBA. We have two shows with it. But Locked On NBA, there's no offseason. Doug, Matt, and Hayes keep you up to date on contract negotiations, rumors, and everything you need to be the most informed NBA fan. Find Locked On NBA on YouTube or wherever you listen to podcasts. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. So let's switch gears to looking at current players on the team, what things are going to look like for them next year. And one guy I want to look at is Jose Alvarado. Has kind of dealt with some injuries the past couple of years here, but is still a massively impactful player on the team. But I think he's going to have a slightly different role this coming year than he has had in the past. He's been the backup point guard. And if you assume the starting lineup of Jordan Poole, Herb Jones, Trey Murphy, Zion Williamson, and then either Messi or Looney, is he still the backup point guard with the addition of Jeremiah Fears, or does Fears kind of take that role? And I think it's probably going to go to Fears. You need to find a clear role for him and then just let him try and do that and, the best to succeed in it. And that means maybe a different role for Jose Alvarado. Now, I still think, because the other thing is, I don't think you can play him and Fears together in the backcourt. That's far too undersized, a liability defensively, and I don't think that it's just not going to work. You can't do that, right? It's got to kind of be one or the other. And I think, you just drafted Jeremiah Fears 7th overall. That's likely who it's going to be. And when you look at Jose Alvarado's contract, unbelievably tradable. And there was a lot of interest in him last season at the trade deadline. Milwaukee was really looking to try and go and get him. And the Pelicans didn't want to trade him. They love this guy. Look, I love this guy, right? Everyone loves Jose Alvarado. It's just as great of a fan favorite pretty much as you get on this team. So, with that in mind, also, wait, hold on. Let me see if I can pull up another kind of nuts stat for you here when it comes to him. We're just this one just jumped out at me, and I was like, wait, is that really a thing here? Let's see. No, it was not the case. He was 4th on minutes, though, in the team last year, which I think is kind of crazy for a backup. All the injuries, y'all. So he is an impactful player, and you do need to find a role for him. Basically, his whole time here in New Orleans, they have been significantly better with him on the court than off the court. Significantly better when it comes to the on-off numbers, right? Last year, they were plus 2.6 per 100 possessions better with him on the court. The year before that, when they were good, plus 9.8. The year before that, not too great. Plus 2.6 the year before that playoff year, 7.5 positive. He's always just, he's the type of guy that you've got to look beyond the stats on and just be like, he impacts the game in a positive way. You got to find a role for him. They will, right? And then he'll rub point at times. He'll be a pest defensively and doing what he always does, and we will love that. But this year, I think he's going to be a little bit more off ball and more as a shooter. They need him to be a shooter because there is a lack of shooting on this team. And if you're running kind of Jeremiah Fears as your backup point guard, and maybe it'll be Jose instead of Jeremiah Fears, you need him to shoot the ball to kind of justify being out there on the court, particularly if you play him with Zion or some of these other guys. He's been up and down a little bit when it comes to shooting the three. Last year, he shot 36% from deep on 5.5 attempts per game. That's pretty good. It's not elite, but it's good enough. The year before that was 37.7%. That's a much better number. Not as much volume, but it was also, different role. He got more minutes this past year. So when you look at it in terms of 3-point attempts, it's still just trending upward for him. He's gone from per 36 minutes, 4.7 to 6.8, 7.2 to 8.1 per 36 minutes last year. He played about 24 minutes per game. If he can do that closer to 40%, that becomes a game changer for him, and it really opens things up for New Orleans, and it gives them something they need that they're lacking. They're lacking some outside shooting right now, a lot of 3-point shooting. Maybe, if Jose spent the summer working on that sort of thing, that I think would be a massive advantage for him. And this is a dude that does a ton of work in the offseason, and that's something that I love about him. ran into him at a hotel a couple of years ago in Los Angeles in the summer. I was like, what are you doing here? He's out here, working out and going through some of the runs over at UCLA that he was invited to, which I think is a really cool thing. This is that dude who wants to put in work in the off season, working on that 3-point shot and making sure that's as consistent as possible, I think would be a massively important thing for him and the team. And so with Jeremiah Fears, I could see his role shifting this year as they want Fears to be, your future point guard. Will he be ready for that on day one? I'm not sure. Summer League was a little bit mixed, though. Felt pretty good to see from him. But I do think they need to find the right role for Jose, and it might be shifting him a little bit. Look, he might be a more tradable guy, too. I don't hope that's the case, right? I got the game-worn signed jersey here. So we'll see what ends up happening there, and that might lead into a show tomorrow a little bit, too, of who's the most tradable guys on the team? Who are we expecting to get moved during the season, not expecting to get moved, those sorts of things. But Jose's one of them too. And so the better he plays, the right role for him, the more his value goes up. But you need to still find a spot for him because this is a guy who is going to massively impact the game in a positive way for New Orleans, as he always does. Last year, I think I made a pact of I'm not going to doubt him anymore. I've always been he's undersized. Is there going to be a problem? And then he just wins his minutes, right? Just proving doubters wrong constantly. So it's best not to doubt. But I'm going to see what his role is this year. I could see it being much more 3-point shooting and kind of off-ball usage guy while being a pest on defense as well. What do you hope Jose Alvarado's role is going to be? Do you think it'll be Jeremiah Fears as the backup point guard or Jose? Let me know in the comments down below. So that's going to do it for this episode of Locked On Pelicans. We'll do another Mount Rushmore guy tomorrow. We'll talk about some of the tradable players on this team and what we expect to happen. There's a whole lot to cover here. We're not dropping down to 3 days a week this offseason on the Locked On Pelicans podcast. So I appreciate y'all listening. As always, I'm your host, Jake Madison, at NOLA Jake on Twitter, and I'll be back with y'all tomorrow.